You fed my daughter. According to ancestral tradition, I now belong to you," said the Apache mother to the cowboy. Before we start the story, please like it and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Calder Rourke never thought he would stay on that cliff for so long. When he arrived 5 years ago, he was just looking for a place where he could breathe without feeling so heavy in the chest. The hard life on the ranch had left him with a limp and sleepless nights. Then illness took his wife and the child she was expecting. Since then, the town had meant uncomfortable questions. People felt sorry for him. But he didn't want that either. So he built a cabin out of pine logs and stone, dug his own well, and fenced in the land. It wasn't much, but it withstood the wind. The cattle always had grass to eat. The hut stayed warm. He kept moving. That was the plan. That morning began like so many others. He went out early to collect firewood. The ground was hardened by frost, and with every step, his left leg ached. He didn't complain. He just shifted his weight and kept going. The sun was just peeking out, pale and colorless. When he reached another log, something caught his attention to the left. Movement. He stopped. Silence. At the edge of the trees, about 30 meters away, he spotted a figure crouching behind a fallen log. Small and very still. Calder stood motionless for a few seconds, watching. No animal moved like that. No adult could fit behind that log. He narrowed his eyes and moved forward slowly, his boots crunching on the grass. As he approached, the figure took shape. It was a girl, apparently Apache. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. She was curled up with her knees to her chest and her arms wrapped around her legs. She wasn't wearing a coat or shoes, and her face and hair were covered in dust. Her lips were dry, and her eyes were open and staring straight ahead. She didn't flinch when he approached. She didn't speak. Calder slowly crouched down to her level. "Does it hurt?" he asked in a low voice. She blinked once, but showed no sign of understanding. Her jaw was trembling. He took off his coat and placed it over her shoulders. Her little body was so light. She smelled of earth and old smoke, but remained silent. He lifted her carefully, putting one arm under her legs and the other around her back. She didn't struggle or stiffen. This unsettled him more than a scream would have done. He carried her back across the field to the cabin. Inside, he laid her on the fur rug in front of the stove. The fire was already burning. He added more wood and pumped the bellows until the flames rose high. He took a tin cup, filled it with warm water, and brought it to her lips. She sipped it slowly, as if afraid it would run out. Then he heated up the beans and cornbread from the night before and broke them into small pieces. The girl ate hungrily with both hands and quickly fell silent. Calder didn't say a word. He just watched her, arms crossed, mind racing. Where was her family, her tribe? Was anyone looking for her? How far had she walked? How long had she been in hiding? After eating, she wrapped herself more tightly in her coat, rested her head against the fireplace, and fell asleep. She fell asleep so quickly that it surprised him. Calder sat at the table, not taking his eyes off her. He watched her ribs moving as she breathed and wondered what on earth had happened to her. His stomach knotted, and he kept the fire burning all night, sleeping sitting up in case someone came looking for her. Or worse. The girl didn't wake up the next day, turning over only once during the night before settling back down again. He checked her pulse. It was steady. She had no fever. She just needed rest. He washed her feet with warm water, split a woolly blanket to wrap them in, and put another one over her small body. Outside, he fed the animals, chopped more wood, and scanned the edge of the forest. There was no sign of anyone. By the morning of the third day, Calder was beginning to wonder if Dread had been abandoned. He was adjusting a hinge on the barn door when the dog barked once and collapsed. He looked up. A figure was climbing the cliff path, alone. It was a woman. She was walking slowly, with one hand on her thigh, as if she were suffering from cramps or fatigue. Her traditional suede dress was worn and dusty. The wind blew across her hips and chest. The low neckline revealed the soft curve of her bust. A broken seam on the side revealed the tan on her waist. Her legs, covered in dust and scratches, peeped out from the high slits in her skirt. She was barefoot, with her long hair braided into thick ropes and adorned with feathers and beads. Her face was imposing, with high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and dark, tired-looking eyes.
She didn't scream. She just kept walking. Calder, the ascendant, stood still with his hands hanging loosely at his sides. He didn't consider picking up the rifle. She wasn't coming to fight. She was coming, exhausted. She stopped a few steps from the door. Her shoulders rose and fell. "Unwanted child," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. He almost didn't understand her. He nodded once and stepped aside. She entered without saying another word. The little girl barely moved when she felt her mother's presence. The girl's voice broke into a whisper. "Mama." The woman fell to her knees. She held the girl tightly against her chest, stroked her hair, and kissed her forehead. The girl clung to her. Calder remained in the doorway. The fire lit up the room. The woman looked up at him. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears. "Elin," he said, his accent strong but his words clear. He nodded again. "Calder." She looked down, surprising him with the unexpected. She remained on her knees. "I follow the old way," she explained calmly. "You fed my daughter. She lives. That's why I'm here. Now I belong. If you accept." She did not raise her face. She did not seek to clarify further. Calder looked at her. He had never believed in such customs, but the firmness and silence with which she had spoken were things he could not ignore. He could see the dirt on her hands and the purple marks on her arm. Her ribs were visible through the torn seam of her dress. She had been through something difficult, something she didn't want to talk about. He looked again at the girl, who was now asleep with her face pressed against Ilani's side. They had no one else. He took a step back, rested his hand on the doorframe, and opened the door wider. Lani looked at him. No words, just a nod. He got up, picked up his daughter, and went inside. Calder closed the door behind them. The click of the wood sounded heavier than normal. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew they were there to stay. The next morning, when Ilan arrived at Calder's cabin, the wind had died down, but the cold remained harsh. A light layer of snow covered the fences and the roof, just enough to melt by noon, but enough to remind them that winter was coming. Calder was already outside when the sky cleared, wiping the ice from the drinking trough with his gloved hand and watching the smoke rise straight up from the chimney. This indicated both calm and that everything inside was still. He entered slowly, leaving wet footprints on the threshold. Lani was kneeling by the stove, feeding the fire with practiced movements. The unnamed girl slept by the heat, under Calder's coat, her hand under her cheek, breathing softly and steadily. Ilani didn't look up when she heard him come in. She continued arranging the wood and took the beans he had prepared the night before out of the sack. She moved with quiet confidence, as if she had always done these tasks. Calder watched her for a moment. Her dress was still torn. The neckline had fallen, and a seam under her arm had torn further. He didn't stare, but he did notice. He couldn't help it. He was a man. Even so, his gaze lingered more on the bruises on her arms, marked by fresh but healing fingerprints. She hadn't said what they were running from. Not yet, at least. He didn't ask, but he knew only too well what kind of hands had left those marks. He cleared his throat slowly. "You need clothes. You and her." Ilan nodded slightly, but didn't look at him. "She has a name. Ilani." "Ilani," he repeated. "That's right, Ilani." Empty silence crept back between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it felt significant. He hung the pot of water over the fire. She got up and crossed the cabin. She hung the blankets she had washed the night before near the stove to dry. Calder then noticed her swollen, bruised ankle. Still, she walked. "You're limping." She looked at her foot, then raised her face. "We walk a lot." "Where?" She hesitated. Then she said, "From the south. 3 days." Someone was behind her. Yanni held his gaze. His eyes were impossible to read. No, that answer was enough for now. For the moment, at least. Calder didn't insist. As he worked, he mapped out a plan in his mind. Supplies were running low. With 2 more people living with him, he would have to go down to the village. He hated going there. He hadn't been there since spring, and even then he had spoken to as few people as possible. There were too many stares and too much curiosity, but now he had no choice. "Tomorrow I'm going to town," he said quietly. "Flour, beans, salt, boots for the girl and thread for your dress." Lonnie turned. Her voice was soft. "It's not necessary. I'll manage."
"I'll fix it. Do you need shoes?" She didn't reply. She just looked down and nodded again. Ilan stirred by the fire, slowly sitting up and looking at her as if he wanted to read her mind. She blinked hard, as if waking from a dream. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded, and Ilan helped her daughter to sit up and tucked a folded blanket around her back. Calder handed her a tin of beans on a plate, which she took with both hands. Like her mother, the girl ate in silence, without making a noise or creating a mess, as if they still wanted to go unnoticed. After breakfast, Lonnie helped gather food for the animals. Calder showed her where he kept the sacks and tools. She watched him move the barn bolt, then imitated him. Attentive eyes, quick hands. He noticed how she always kept Yanni in sight, either placing her in the corner wrapped in coats or riding blankets, or checking on her every few minutes. In the afternoon, Calder watched her from the corral while she sewed the torn edge of her dress. She sat on the porch steps with her legs tucked under her and her hair falling over her shoulder. She was silent, focused, and beautiful in a strong rather than delicate way. The neckline of her dress had loosened over her chest, and when she leaned forward to thread the needle, the movement drew Calder's gaze back to her. However, he forced himself to look away. She wasn't his, and he wouldn't treat her as if she were. That night, as he slept by the fire, Calder got up and leaned against a post. The sky was bright with cold, clear stars. He didn't ask her what she was thinking. He knew it was better not to push, but she spoke anyway. "My husband left a long time ago," she said quietly. "We were with other Apaches, some good, some not." He looked at her expectantly. "Traitorous white men came," she continued. "Not soldiers or law, just men. They took our food and blankets. They wanted more." Calder's jaw tightened. "I ran with Ilani. They didn't follow us. It would have been too much trouble for them, but I saw what they did to the others." She looked straight ahead, her face expressionless, but her voice was heavy with meaning. "I came with you because you fed her. That's enough. On our way, that means everything." Calder exhaled. "I'm not a good man," he said. "I'm just lonely." "That's why I came," she replied. "Only men with empty houses make room." He didn't know how to respond, so he fell silent. She didn't come any closer, but she didn't move away either, and that was enough. They stood there for a while before going inside, and from that moment on, neither of them ever felt completely alone again. The next morning dawned gray and frosty, the sky covered with low clouds. A thin frost covered the trough again, and the horses were stiff in their stalls, breathing out short clouds of vapor. Calder was already awake before dawn, adjusting the girth, when he noticed movement behind him. Ilani was standing in the barn doorway, wrapped in a blanket and barefoot. He looked down at her swollen, bruised ankle. "You should rest," he said. "I'll help." "You can't with that foot." She didn't answer. She just looked towards the stable, where Yanni was quietly catching a pony with the broken handle that Calder had given her the night before. "I'm going to town," said Calder. "Today." Ilani nodded slowly. Then she hesitated. "They'll recognize me there." He paused with his hand on the bridle. He looked at her. "They'll see you, but they won't know who you are." It was a fair question. Calder thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. "I doubt it. The nearest Apache village is days away. No one there will know your name or your story." She nodded again. That was all she needed to hear. Calder finished saddling the horse and mentally reviewed the list of things he needed. Flour, salt, beans, jerky, thread, needles, a blanket, boots small enough for her feet, and something warm to wear. Maybe even a spare dress if he could get it without having to explain too much. As he mounted Jan, she ran towards him, her little legs crunching on the frost. She handed him a figurine made of sticks and pine shavings. He took it in his gloved hand and looked at it. "Thank you," he said. "Mom said you're traveling far." He said, "I'll be back before nightfall." Lonnie came over and gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We'll be waiting for you," she said. Calder nodded and left without saying anything else. It took him 2 hours to reach the outskirts of Sandham Flats. He hadn't set foot in the town since the spring, when he had only come to buy wire and oats. He never stayed. This time, however, he would have to do more. The general store still had its windows covered with old tobacco advertisements. The doorbell still wasn't fixed. It rang listlessly as he entered. Tad Warren, the shopkeeper, looked up from behind the counter. He had the same thick mustache and suspicious eyes. "Rourke," Tad said, folding his newspaper.
"Didn't expect to see you before the snowfall. I wasn't planning on it," Calder replied. Tad forced a smile. "What do you need?" Calder listed them slowly, one by one. He avoided explaining why he was asking for a second pair of boots or a thread that was useless for mending men's clothes. He omitted the dress altogether. Instead, he asked if there was any loose fabric. "Cotton in a roll at the back," replied Zad, "for quilts and some wool scraps." "I'll take both." The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow but didn't ask any questions. While he was packing, Calder saw a second-hand coat hanging on a hook near the door. Small and lined with rabbit fur, it looked tailor-made for Johnny. "How much for the girl's coat?" Tad frowned. "It's not worth anything anymore." "I'll take it." Calder paid in cash. Outside, he secured everything on the mule and remounted. The trip had taken longer than expected, and he was reluctant to return with the sky darkening. The wind had picked up. He urged the horse on and didn't stop until he reached his land. The cabin was silent. There was no smoke in the chimney and no noise in the corral. He dismounted abruptly, his heart pounding, and tied the reins. He pushed the door open, but stopped instantly. The fire was lit. Ione was sitting on the floor with a tin cup in her hands. Lonnie was behind her, one hand on the girl's back. In her other hand, she held a long wooden spoon, stirring the stew in the pot. She turned slowly to look at him. Her gaze was steady. "You're late." Calder entered and closed the door behind him. The atmosphere changed. "Are you cold?" she asked. "No," he replied, walking over and leaving the bundle by the stove. Ione crawled over and opened one of the sacks. She let out a little cry of surprise when she found the coat inside. She picked it up and looked at her mother. Ilani took the coat carefully, turned it over in her hands, and looked back at Calder. "You thought of this, not just the food." He nodded. "I know what it means," she said. "In your way." He remained silent. Yanni walked towards him, his bare feet tapping softly on the floor. He stopped nearby. "Not touching or invading, just they are in my way," he said calmly. "A man who feeds, protects, and provides warmth is not just shelter, he is home." Calder moved slightly but did not pull away.
I don't need promises, she continued. But I want you to know that I didn't choose this out of obligation. I chose it because you made room for me without asking anything in return. Then she placed a light hand on his forearm, more to steady herself than to convince him. Calder looked at her silently for a long time. "All right," he said at last. They spoke no more that night. The three of them sat by the fire, alone together. The coat was still draped over her shoulders. Something had changed. It wasn't sudden, but the distance between Calder and Lonnie no longer felt insurmountable. Now it seemed like a space waiting to be filled. 3 days passed. The wind grew harsher, and the nights grew longer. A storm swept through the valley, covering the cliff with fresh snow. There was so much of it that Calder had to shovel the path to the barn twice to ensure the doors wouldn't freeze shut. Most mornings the sky remained low and gray. Inside the cabin, the air felt heavier with 3 people moving around instead of 1. Still, they found their rhythm. Ilani got up before dawn, lit the stove, boiled water, and set aside beans or flour, all without being asked. She quickly learned where he kept the salt, the wheat stone, and the old dented tin cups. Yanni also began to help. She followed her mother around, sweeping the dirt floor with the pine broom that Calder had made for her. The girl's cough, which had initially been mild, worsened slightly in the cold, but Ilani boiled herbs in water and placed wet cloths on her chest. She knew what she was doing. Calder noticed. He didn't ask any questions about her past life, and she didn't offer any explanations. This silence felt like an instinct for survival rather than distance, as if the three of them knew that the past was too big to be contained within a single conversation. However, the atmosphere between Calder and Lonnie had changed since the night he returned from the village. She was still cautious. She still looked away when she leaned over the fire or brushed against it on her way to the bathroom. Once, however, as she adjusted the neckline of her dress, she looked up to see if he was watching her, and he was. She didn't look away. That same night, Yanni fell asleep on the floor again, wrapped in the new blanket that Calder had brought him. The cabin was warm from the day's fire and the wind outside had died down. Calder sat at the table mending a broken rein.
His hands moved slowly, tiredly. Ilani sewed by the stove. Her dress had been modestly repaired. The neckline was higher, and there were new laces on the sides, but it still showed off her figure. In the flickering light, the curves of her waist and hips were hinted at. He was surprised to find himself looking at her more and more, yet he still hadn't touched her. At around midnight, when the fire was dying down, Ilani rose silently and crossed to where he was standing. Her steps were slow and steady. She didn't speak. She simply took the broken leather from his hands, examined it, ran her thumb over the crack, and said softly, "You pulled too hard. It's not necessary." He looked at her firm, confident fingers. "You always fix everything yourself," she said. Calder nodded. There was no other way. She carefully placed the leather on the table and stood there. Between him and the fire, the light behind her outlined her silhouette. The flames outlined her in gold and shadow. The heat caused her dress to move slightly. Again, the curve of her chest was noticeable in that deep light. Her expression remained serious. "I'm not afraid of men," she said. "I never thought you were. It's what men believe they possess that I fear." Calder leaned forward, his elbows on the table and his gaze fixed on her. "I don't possess you." She tilted her head slightly. "Not yet." There was no reproach in her voice, only truth. "You're not here because I claim you," he said. "I know. I'm here because you didn't." Again, there was a meaningful silence. Ilan crossed to the hearth and stirred the embers, then returned. "You had a wife." Calder nodded. "Years ago. A son. He was never born." Ilan sat slowly down on the floor with his knees to his chest. "I had a sister. She was with us before she became slow to answer, before the men arrived. She didn't run fast enough," she finally said. Calder understood without asking any more questions. They didn't speak again that night. Before going to sleep, however, Ilan laid a second blanket on the floor, one that had always belonged to his daughter, and tucked it in next to her, leaving enough room for someone else. He didn't say who it was for, but it wasn't necessary. The next morning, Calder woke up to the smell of salted bacon and black coffee. Lonnie was barefoot at the stove, with her sleeves rolled up, moving slowly from pot to pan. She had gathered firewood outside, her coat zipped up to her neck and her cheeks flushed from the cold. Calder walked behind Ilan to get a tin cup. He didn't touch her, but she leaned slightly towards him. The day was drawing to a close. Snow covered the ground, not just the banks. The stream had frozen over slightly, and Calder had to break the ice with a shovel to give the horses water. The cabin grew darker earlier each day, and with each nightfall, the boundaries between them shifted gently. They no longer moved like strangers. Lonnie now separated Calder's cup from the others. When she served his meal, she didn't wait for him to ask for it. Yanni had started calling him cow, testing out the word as if it were a riddle. She would smile every time he responded. He never corrected her. That morning, Calder was chopping wood behind the cabin when Lonnie stood nearby with a bucket of hot water and rags. Yanni sat on the porch step, humming a tune only she knew and mending the torn arm of her doll. The sun shone on the snow, bright but fleeting. "You'll need more wool," Lonnie said, watching him stack the split wood. "I'll go down again soon, before the pass freezes. We'll go with you." He didn't answer, just looked at her. "If they see you, they'll ask questions I don't want to answer." Yanni's gaze didn't waver. "Are you ashamed of us, Calder?" He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "I'm not, just being cautious. There are people in town who think that Apache blood shouldn't be so close to their fences, let alone inside a white man's cabin." "Then let them whisper," she replied. She turned towards the hearth and stirred the embers, then returned. "The truth gives warmth." His words did not. He did not respond. But the way she said it stayed with him long after the firewood had been used up. That afternoon, the three of them shared stew and cornbread at the table, sitting together as a family for the first time in a while. Ani told him how many crows she had seen that day. 6, maybe 7, although the last one could have been a large crow. Calder was surprised to find himself really listening to her, and even smiling, not because of the birds, but because her voice no longer sounded fearful. After the meal, Anne helped him wash the dishes. They worked side by side, sometimes brushing against each other. She reached for a rag on the shelf behind him. As she did so, her chest brushed against his arm through her torn dress. Despite the stitching, the tear was still visible.
He noticed, and so did she, but neither said anything. Once they had finished, Calder sat barefoot in front of the fire, massaging the ankle that hurt the most from the cold. Ione crossed the room calmly, taking slow steps. She sat down next to him without asking permission, her thigh gently brushing against his. Her dress had ridden up slightly, revealing the smooth skin of her leg. She didn't adjust it. Her eyes remained fixed on the flames. "You're limping. I notice it more now." "An old war wound?" "Yes. You still have enemies some days, but I don't look for them." She looked down at her hands. "You don't shake when you sleep anymore." He looked at her in surprise. "I saw you," she said. "The first night you brought us here. You were restless, as if someone were still chasing you." Calder didn't deny it. It had been a long time since he'd shared a roof with anyone. Ione turned slightly towards him. "I know what it's like to dream of hands around your neck and wake up without a voice." He watched her intently. Her voice was calm, but her hands were clenched in her lap. "You're safe here," he said. "I know," she replied. "But safety doesn't make the past any smaller. It just makes it quieter." Then she placed her hand on his chest, fingers spread. He didn't move. Her thumb brushed the lighter-colored skin of the scar near his collarbone, a bullet wound he had never explained. She didn't ask. Her hand remained there, warm and firm. Then she spoke again, more softly. "You still think I came only for her?" He looked into her eyes. There was no demand, only quiet pain, a desire for clarity.
He didn't say it. Then tell me what you see when you look at me. I see someone who has survived more than she shows. I see a woman who maintains her dignity even when she shouldn't have to fight for it. Her eyes moistened, but no tears fell. And if I told you that I want more than shelter, would you walk away? Calder's hand moved and rested softly on her waist. His thumb traced the edge of her dress where it touched her skin. He didn't squeeze, he didn't pull away, he just stayed there. I would stay, he said. She tilted her forehead until it touched his. Then her lips brushed his cheek, lingering close to his mouth. Neither of them sought anything more. That night, as she slept under the covers, Ione climbed into Calder's bed for the first time, keeping her clothes on. She put her hand inside his shirt and lay beside him, her warm body touching his. There was no carnal love and no words, but they both managed to sleep without ghosts for the first time. At dawn, the light coming through the frosted windows was pale and calm. The storm had passed during the night, leaving a white silence over the cliff. The snow weighed heavily on the roof, enough to make the beams creak. Inside, the fire had died down, but the bed was still warm. Ione lay next to him, her arm across his chest, breathing slowly and deeply. She hadn't moved in her sleep. Her hair spilled over his shoulder, her braid was loose, her leg was crossed over his. Her curves were real and soft under the covers. Her dress was still on and wrinkled. Her body nestled against him, leaving no space between them. She hadn't asked permission to stay, she just stayed there. Calder remained motionless for a long time, listening to the silence and feeling her weight anchoring him. He didn't feel trapped, he felt accompanied. Johnny's cough echoed faintly across the room. It was a dry throat clearing, followed by the rustling of blankets. Calder moved carefully, but Johnny stirred and opened his eyes. There was no shame in his gaze. No apology either, just calm. "I'll bring him some water," she whispered. "I'll take care of it," Calder replied, stepping forward. She watched him cross the room, barefoot and shirtless. His torso was marked with scars, old burns on his side, a bullet hole in his back, and rope marks on his wrists. She didn't look away. He knelt down next to Johnny and gently touched her forehead. Still warm, but no fever. "Are you okay, little bird?"
"You're not going," he said. "But if you and your mother want to, that's different." Ione looked at him for a long time, then said, "You're talking in your sleep." Calder blinked. "I know whose name you're saying, not my mother's, the other one's," the girl added. Calder's jaw tightened slightly. The little girl's face became expressionless. Calder slowly stood up. "He used to talk to ghosts," he said. "I don't anymore." That evening, after dinner, with the fire burning peacefully and the little girl asleep, Ione went out onto the porch. Calder followed her. The moon made the snow shine like silver. It was cold but not harsh. The sky was clear and calm. Ione stood with her arms crossed over her chest. Her shawl was tightly wrapped, but the neckline of her dress was still slightly open. She didn't adjust it as the wind played with the edges. Calder's gaze wandered over her, not with desire, but with respect. The woman hid nothing. She stood as she was, solid, open, and real. He came to her side. "Do you miss your family?" he asked. She shook her head. "Some are dead. Others gave me no chance. A woman without a husband is considered a threat. I had no brothers and none remain." Calder thought, "You didn't want to go back," he said. "I wanted Johnny to see a better life," the woman said. "But maybe this is that life. A man who listens, a solid roof, a girl who no longer cries at night." Calder looked at her. "Do you think that man is me?" he said. The woman shook her head. "You wait. You don't pressure," she said. The woman turned to him. She approached. Her hands undid the tie at his neck. His shirt loosened, his collarbone and silhouette becoming distinct in the firelight. "She's choosing," she said, looking into his eyes. "Not out of obligation, but willingly." Calder took a quiet, deep breath. He moved closer. His hand touched her waist, pulling her toward him. The woman didn't pull away. She placed a soft kiss on his shoulder, his neck, and finally his lips, then deeper.
The woman responded with the same intensity. Inside, the little girl was sleeping. Outside, the snow whispered to the mountains. That night, Yoni was in Calder's bed. This time, the dress was left aside. Neither of them saw any ghosts. By morning, the sun had risen over the mountain. Calder opened his eyes. The bed was still warm. Yoni was beside him, one arm across his chest, her face peaceful. Her hair was open and tousled, touching his skin. Calder got up quietly and pulled the blanket over her. The girl stirred slightly but didn't wake. The little girl's cough was mild. Calder filled a cup with hot water and took it to the bed by the fire. "Good morning," he said softly. The little girl opened her eyes. "You slept in your own bed tonight, with my mom," she said slowly. "Both of us," said Calder. The girl smiled, drank her water, and wrapped herself in the blanket again. "Good," she said. That one word said a lot. Outside, the snow had begun to melt. The weather had changed. A brief calm before a new storm. Calder decided to repair the barn roof. That morning he was up on the roof. The little girl was playing. Johnny was watching her. Calder was distracted for a moment. Johnny bent down and picked up a piece of wood that had fallen on the ground. Her dress shifted, revealing her slender waist. Calder immediately looked away, this time without embarrassment, but with feeling. This feeling was no longer a silent echo. It was something that demanded attention. Johnny caught his gaze. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "It's just that this place used to be very quiet. Now it's different." The woman smiled. She said no more. When the work was done, they sat on the porch. The little girl was asleep inside. Calder handed Johnny a cup of coffee. The woman, wrapped in the blanket on her shoulder, drank slowly.
Her now dry dress had loosened at the neckline. Her breath rose and fell, accentuating her curves, but Calder did not look eagerly. He had already etched every detail of the previous night into his memory. "I want to stay," she said softly. "You are already here. I don't mean spending time here. I mean really staying." Calder looked her straight in the eye. "You were afraid I would kick you out. Sometimes I don't believe the peace will last." He put down the jug and leaned his elbows on his knees. "I didn't take you in out of guilt. I didn't touch you out of pity. I want you here. I want her here too." She took his hand. Her fingers were rough and weathered from work. "Then say it out loud so I know I'm not dreaming." He nodded slowly. "This is your place. You and the girl. As long as I'm alive, this will be your home." Her eyes softened. She didn't cry. Ione wasn't a woman who cried easily, but she kissed his hand, held it against her cheek, and whispered something in Apache that he did not understand. He could still feel it, though. That night, when the girl was asleep, Ione found Calder sitting on the edge of the bed, untying his boots. She wrapped her arms around him from behind and rested her head on his shoulder. He leaned towards her. "There is no tradition that binds us anymore. Just us." "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes it valuable." That night, they came together again, calmly and tenderly rather than hungrily. His hands were on her skin, his mouth on her collarbone. She lay open beneath him. She let him undress her completely, and he took his time. He moved confidently, as if he finally understood that this would not disappear at dawn. She fell asleep in his arms, and he lay there for a long time afterwards, staring at her hand resting on the soft curve of her waist, and thinking about how something broken could become so whole. There were still questions about what had happened to her people, and whether the men who had hurt them were still out there, but none of that belonged to that night. That night, they were safe. That night, they were already family. The next morning, Calder sat on the porch steps, sharpening a knife, while the girl braided a piece of string beside him. The saw was silent. A pale mist covered the field, rising slowly as the sun came up.
Inside, Yoni folded blankets, humming softly an old, gentle Apache song as if it came from the depths of her memory. More than 2 weeks had passed since they arrived at the cabin. Life had fallen into a rhythm, and none of it seemed temporary.
Calder had questions. He hadn't dared ask them before, but everything changed when he walked in that afternoon to find Ione sitting at the table, her hands clasped and her face carefree, yet with something else about her. She looked at him as he entered and pointed to the chair in front of her. "There are things I haven't told you," she said calmly. "I don't want them to catch up with us later." He sat down without speaking. "You're not just passing through," she continued. "We were fleeing from a trading post south of here that's so small it doesn't even appear on maps. It's run by outlaws." She looked down at the table. "First they traded goods, then people, especially girls. I worked there for a while, keeping to myself and trying to hide her, but when the man who ran the post found out she was mine, an Apache woman of mixed heritage said she would fetch a better price. He planned to take her away." The rancher's hands closed slowly, his knuckles turning pale. "I fought," she continued. "I managed to wound one of them, grab Johnny, and we left that same night. I knew they could follow us, but the snow came early. I think it slowed them down." "Do you think they're still coming after you?" Calder asked. "I don't know, but I couldn't let you promise to take care of us without knowing what might come to your door." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "I already promised," he said. "Whatever happens isn't your fault, and they'll have to get past me first." Ione nodded, her jaw tight. "I needed to know that. You deserved to choose. I made my choice the day I opened that door." She let out a long breath, releasing the tension from her shoulders. Then she stood up and walked around the table. Calder stood up too, and she hugged him around the waist, resting her forehead on his chest. He held her silently, one hand firmly on the back of her neck. That night, Calder placed the Henry rifle on the table and began to check it piece by piece. Johnny watched him without speaking. He knew that look. It wasn't fear, it was preparation. They made a plan. If the men appeared, Ione and the girl would escape through the barn door at the back. The rancher would deal with anyone who came through the entrance, but deep down they hoped it wouldn't come to that. They didn't believe it would come to that. The snow had already put enough distance between them. The following days passed without incident. Ione busied herself with repairs to the cabin, mending curtains, arranging shelves, and even building a makeshift drawer out of old boards that Calder had never touched. She drew small symbols on the fireplace with charcoal. They resembled childish scribbles, but he understood their significance. He was putting down roots and leaving a memory. One afternoon she approached the barn with a question in her eyes that needed no preamble. "If something happened to you," she said, "would you like to be buried here?" Calder looked towards the hillside behind the cabin. There was a gnarled tree hardened by the years. He had thought about it in solitude more than once. "Yes," he replied. She nodded. "I would bury you next to your wife." He paused in surprise. "How do you know?" "You once said her name in your sleep." Sarah exhaled slowly. "I loved her." "I know," she said after a moment's silence. "But I'm not her." "You're not," he admitted. "You're the one who's here." Then she kissed him slowly, keeping her eyes open, and he responded by putting his hand firmly on his waist and holding her close. That night, after the girl had fallen asleep, curled up between Calder and Ione, the two of them lay facing each other in the dark. Her hand rested on his chest. "I want to have your child," she said suddenly. He blinked. "Are you sure?" "I'm not just surviving anymore. I want a whole life." He caressed her cheek with his thumb. "Then we'll try." This time the kiss was neither hurried nor forced. It was intimate and deliberate. Her dress slipped from her shoulders as his hands traced her hips. She moved closer to him, not as a guest, but as someone who had already claimed that space as her own. Later, as she rested on his chest, breathing calmly, she kept her hand on his heart as if she had always known its rhythm. Outside, the first owl of winter cried out among the trees. Inside, they were already one. Enter. Towards the end of winter, the earth began to change again. The snow no longer clung to every branch, and patches of brown earth could be seen beneath the ice on the path behind the barn. Water trickled down the hillside from the sky. Soon, the songs of birds and the green murmur of pine trees rustling in the breeze would return. Inside the cabin, warmth could be found not only in the fire, but also in the rhythm of life. Calder returned from the barn with an armful of firewood. Yoni was by the hearth, helping the girl to grind dried herbs with a flat stone. The smell of boiling broth filled the air. She stood up, wiped her hands, and approached him. She placed a hand on her stomach, and from the look they exchanged, he knew without words what they had already suspected. She was pregnant. The rancher carefully set down the firewood and stood looking at her hands on her waist. His voice sounded rough in the cold air. She nodded confidently once. "I've carried before. I know the feeling." He took a step forward, covering her hand with his and holding it silently. It wasn't surprise or fear, it was something like gravity. He felt the weight of what she was giving him, a new life, a second chance, not to erase the past, but to build on it. That night, while the girls slept peacefully in the loft that Calder had built a few days earlier, he and Yoni sat on the porch, watching the last of winter's breath slip over the countryside. She leaned on him, wrapped in one of his old coats. The rancher held her tightly, feeling her warmth against his chest. "Did you ever think this would be your life?" she asked. He never answered her honestly, not once. "Do you want me to take your name?" she asked softly. He looked up at the snow-covered trees and remained motionless. "Take it. I already live in your house. I carry your child in my womb. Yoni calls you father. I'm yours if you want me to take your surname." He turned his tense jaw towards her. "Then take it." She nodded slowly. "Say it. Ion Rourke," he said. The name floated in the air as if it had always been his. "Then you'll marry me?" "Yes," she whispered. "And not because I owe you anything, but because I choose to." They kissed slowly, with certainty and without hesitation. That spring came early. Weeks later, the rancher rode to Sandown Flats with Yoni by his side. She wore a blue cotton dress that he had bartered for from a traveling merchant. The cut of the dress highlighted her curves, and her hair was styled in a neat braid. Yoni rode ahead of him in the saddle, wrapped in his coat. They stopped at the registry office, signed the county book, and left as husband and wife. No ceremony, no sermon.
Just their signatures and the silent bond they had forged day by day. People stared, of course, a white man and an Apache woman. But the rancher didn't flinch. He took her hand in full view as they passed the cantina. No one dared say anything. Back on the hill, life went on. By the 3rd month, Sion's pregnancy was becoming noticeable. She had prepared a corner of the house as a nursery, decorating it with pieces of fabric that she had sewn herself. The rancher built a pine rocking chair, sanding it late into the night. Each board had been worked on by hands that had once only known survival, but which now sought something different, something permanent. In the middle of summer, Sion gave birth to a healthy baby boy with dark eyes and lungs capable of shaking the cabin with his cries. The rancher cried shamelessly as he held him in his arms. He kissed Johnny's forehead and whispered a thank you into his hair. They named the boy Samuel, after Calder's father. Ani insisted on teaching him songs from both worlds. By the time autumn arrived, the cabin no longer felt like just a shelter. It was a home. One afternoon, with the fire crackling low and Samuel asleep in a woven cradle, the rancher embraced Johnny around the waist in front of the hearth. He leaned into him, filled with peace. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "Not again." She turned in his arms and placed her hand on his heart. "You never lost it. I just hadn't found you yet." He kissed her slowly and surely. That night, and all the nights that followed, he stayed not out of duty or tradition, but because he finally had a reason to stay. And this time, that stay with him too. Yes.